Okay, here's the Zoom. Power it with this thing, just your average cell phone charger. Pretty cool feature. You can also power it with batteries, and you can also power it with a 9-volt right there. It only has one output, but it is a stereo output, so if you plug in a stereo cable, you can have stereo. It has an aux in and a mono 1/4 inch input. So this is what I do with mine. Carry it in this briefcase, and I keep the battery pack with it, with a cable. I have a battery charger in there for the rechargeable batteries I'm using in it. Keep a guitar cable and one more cable for hooking it up to my amp, and that's it. And it just works super well. I've been gigging with this for a few months now. I play a lot of jazz gigs, and for those I tend to just bring this. I don't bring any other pedals or anything else because this works great as a tuner, and even if I'm not using any effects on it, it's still worth it just for the tuner because it's a really great tuner. And the fact that it runs off of so many different power sources means it's very unlikely that it'll ever fail to function on a gig. The basic operation of this guy is pretty simple. It's got 3 modes it can be in, and they're toggled with this small button right here. You've got it in memory mode, which is your patches, then stomp mode, which is showing what pedals or what effects you have, and then edit mode, which lets you edit. When you're in edit mode, you can toggle between the different effects you have loaded up with these 5 buttons. So I've got an overdrive, an amp, cabinet, delay, and a spring reverb. And you can see on the screen when the effect is enabled, it's dark, and when it's not enabled, it is grayed out, the name. And you can enable it just by tapping the same button that you're already on. And then you've got these other buttons for a drum machine. Never really used that so far. And then you've got a looper, which is really nice to have. I think the looper is only about 30 seconds, but it's enough for certain situations, and I found it useful. If you go to the setup, you navigate the menus by just using the same 5 buttons. So setup there. You've got autosave. It's actually better than the autosave that's on the G5N and the earlier pedals because it actually saves immediately. It's not on a delay. On the G5N, for example, if you make a change to a patch and then immediately switch to a new patch, it hasn't saved it yet, so it will prompt you and ask if you would like to save, which is annoying because you put autosave on, you expect it to just save automatically. Well, that's what happens here. You don't actually have to wait any amount of time before it saves. Pre-select just means that when you go to a new patch, it won't switch to it immediately. It will wait until you confirm it by pressing both of the foot switches at the same time. I'll demonstrate that. So I'm on patch 51. If I go down a patch, it'll show 50, and it displays this instruction on the screen that I need to press both, and then it will switch. So you can scroll through all your patches that way, and you don't have to worry about accidentally switching to one. The other setting is called bank hold, and when that's on, that means when you scroll through the different patches, you stay on the same bank that you're on. So we're on bank 5 right now, so all the patches go from 5.0 up to 5.9. So if you go to bank 4, now you're on 4.0 to 4.9. Let's see what happens if you turn bank hold off. Yeah, so when bank hold is off, you can scroll through all the presets. You don't have to switch banks by pressing the buttons. So So that's useful if you have, for example, I have presets for bass and for guitar, so I could put all my bass ones on 5, all my electric guitar ones on 4, all my acoustic guitar ones on 3, etc. You have some power and LCD settings here. You can set the type of battery you're using. I'm really not sure what that does. I'm not actually using alkaline or NIMH. I actually modified mine and I'm using lithium batteries. I'll make another video showing how to do that. So I don't know what effect this is having. Maybe I should put it on alkaline since the voltage is closer to that. You got eco mode. I can only assume that is the same as the G5N, which turns it off after a certain amount of time. I don't know what the time limit on this one is. And you got a backlight control, which is nice. This backlight can be pretty bright sometimes, and you might not always want it on. Especially if it's in the middle of the day, you won't even need it. And then a contrast control, which is kind of pointless. Looks best where it was. So then you've got a chain option that allows you to switch the positions of your pedals. You simply press the button corresponding with the effect in the chain, and then press the button corresponding with the position you would like it to take. So if I go with the first position and then throw it into the third position, it moves the pedal that was in the third position into the second position, and the one that was in the second position into the first position. So now I'm going to switch them back, and now they're back. There doesn't seem to be a delete pedal function. What you have to do, so if you want to delete an effect, you have to go to the edit mode, and then you press one pedal while pressing the other pedal until you get to bypass, and then the effect will be gone. A neat little thing that I was surprised to find when I got this is that there's these little buttons right here and right here that are just finger versions of the foot pedals. They're not really any easier to press, but it's kind of neat, and I like the way they're recessed into these little places. It kind of feels good to press them, but I find it's just as easy to press the actual foot switch, so it's kind of pointless. So there's also the patch screen, which will allow you to name the patch and set the volume level. And then of course, if you go to the save function, you can use the foot switches to scroll to whatever patch you would like to save it in, whatever bank, whatever slot you'd like it to be in. If you select the same slot, then it just overwrites it, but if you select a different slot, it'll copy it to a new slot. And then you press both foot switches to confirm the save. I'm going to go to a empty patch. Alright, so on my G5N video, I complained about how certain effects take up 2 slots. The G5N can support up to 9 simultaneous effects, but if you use any of the effects that take up more than 1 slot, then you're going to lose a possible effect that you could have in your chain. For example, the EQs take up 2 slots, all of the amps take up 2 slots, several of the filter effects take up 2 slots, some delays do, I think maybe a reverb or 2 do, and that's not something they tell you before you buy it. They don't tell you that those count toward your total. So if you have 9 slots open and then you put in an amp, now you're down to 7 slots. You put in a cabinet simulation for that amp, now you're down to 6 slots. You put in an EQ, now you're down to 4 slots. So that's a real bummer. I can't help but feel even worse about that because on this one, I'll just show you, I have an empty chain here, nothing going on. For the first effect, I'll put an amp, a Marshall JCM 800. So I'll go back to the effects chain, and you can see it only takes up 1 slot. Then effect number 2, I'll just put a cabinet. Takes up 1 slot. Now I wish the cabinets didn't take up a slot because that's just kind of a waste in my opinion, but we're still at an advantage over the G5N at this time. So then I'll put on the EQ, 7-band EQ, takes up 1 slot. So now we have 2 slots left. So on the G5N, this would have taken up 5 slots, but on the G14, it only takes up 3 slots. I'm not saying that this thing has a ton of processing power left over, because it doesn't, and I'll show you only a few effects can actually go in there now. But just the fact that visually and processing wise, it doesn't take up as much space as on the G5N just kind of makes me angry. But for that reason, I would recommend instead of getting a G5N, just get 2 of these. Especially if you get the ones with the expression pedals. That would be a lot more flexible and interesting to work with than the G5N, I think, if you just hooked up 2 of these together. But anyway, it's now in slot 4. Could put a drive, and then slot 5, maybe a chorus. So obviously this is not a good order for these effects. It shouldn't go amp, cabinet, EQ, drive, chorus. So I'm just going to go to the chain, put the drive first, put the chorus. I don't know, I like running chorus into the front of the amp. And then the EQ could stay where it is, it doesn't need to change. Anyway, building a patch is that simple. You only get 5 slots, and if you're using an amp, you need 2 of those slots to go toward your amp and your cabinet. But like I was just saying, if you bought 2 of these units, you could have one of them set up just with your amp, your cabinet, and your reverb and your delay, and that would leave 1 extra slot in case you wanted to do anything else. And then you could have another one of these for just your effects, just your overdrive or your wah or volume pedal or, you know, whatever else, chorus. And I think that would make a really cool setup. I think it would be better to get 2 of these than to get the G3, the G3N. So anyway, once you've got your patch, say you're playing live, you want to have it on this screen. Use this pedal to highlight the effect that you want to toggle, so it would be my overdrive probably, and then you just press this to toggle it. Now it's off, now it's back on. If I want to toggle the chorus, I just hit this one time, it scrolls over to the right, toggle the chorus off, toggle the chorus back on. You can also, if you have a moment to use your hand, you can just press the buttons and that will toggle them easily. So this pedal has identical sound to the G5N and the G3N. It has the exact same effects, albeit there are a few of them missing. I think there are a few effects that the G5N has that are too processor intensive for this budget unit, but those are the effects that are really useless in any professional capacity anyway. They're more just for fun and for sound design and stuff. Things like the particle reverb or like the space hole or whatever it was called. Those are just fun to mess around with for a minute, but they don't really have a use outside of maybe some studio sound design kind of stuff. But if you're looking for an effects pedal that's super portable, super easy to use, and just is a workhorse, this thing is fantastic. I've been using it by itself for some jazz gigs, just so I could add some overdrive and reverb sometimes. And then using the tuner has been super great. All you do to use the tuner is you press both buttons at the same time. It mutes. You can change it if you don't want it to mute. You can just twist this knob and you can switch it from either muting or bypassing your effects. But I like to keep it on the mute, and then you can change the tuning frequency there. But yeah, I've been using this by itself for guitar gigs with great success, and I've also been using it on my patch called Tuner Only, and that patch is just nothing. It's just the tuner. And I've been really pleased with how it handles tuning. I've had it on my pedal board that I use when I play bass, and I just stick this on the end of the pedal board and it mutes everything if I need to, which is super useful. The fact that it can be powered by a standard 9-volt pedal power supply means I can just throw it on my pedal board because I already have an extra power plug ready to go. And the fact that I can use it on battery power, either with this external battery pack or with the internal batteries, means that I can take it by itself to a gig. Oh yeah, I've also used it on acoustic guitar, and it works well for that. All I would use on that is a compressor for a solo boost and an EQ for some tone shaping, and that's it. And it works great. Another reason I prefer this over the G5N is that when you're on your patch selection mode, the memory mode, you can just start tweaking these knobs and it will bring up a master EQ, and you can boost your lows, cut your lows, do the same thing to your mids and your highs, and you also have a master volume control. That was one of my big complaints about the G5N, is that the master EQ settings were really weak and really difficult to use, and this one works great. It is made of plastic, but I don't know, if you're an adult and you have some sense of respect for your equipment, I don't see any reason that it's going to break on you. Just, you know, don't crush it underneath the truck. I don't know what's so difficult about that, but people seem to think that plastic pedals are worthless. I don't get it. Well, I guess there's nothing else to do. I'll just start recording some examples of some sounds. So some of these don't have cabinets on them when you scroll through the factory presets, so you do kind of have to spend some time and set it up the way you want it. You're not going to be able to just scroll through all the presets and just find sounds that you like, really. They're mostly just for demonstration purposes. Anyway, all the standard electric guitar sounds are totally doable. If you want more possible tones you could get, just go check out any video showing off the G5N or the G3N, because this has the exact same sound engine, mostly the same effects. There's a pretty good chance if you can get a sound on one of those pedals, you can get it on this thing too. But you don't really see a lot of people demonstrating bass or acoustic guitar, so that's what's coming up next. So now I've got my acoustic plugged in. It's pretty silly. So I'll switch it over to my acoustic preset. Looks like I'm missing one of the effects. I don't know which one it was. It doesn't have an unlimited amount of memory for each effect. They actually have way more effects available than can fit on the unit. So you have to load it into the Zoom Guitar Lab software and pick and choose which effects you want loaded on. There's just way too many that you can't fit them all. So I've gone and removed some, I guess, and I don't remember what they were, but when they're not loaded on, they show up as this caution sign saying like, hey, you probably don't want to change this preset because you've removed one of the effects. But if you load it up on the software on the computer, you can actually see what effects are missing from what patches, so there's no problems getting them back if you decide to get them back on there. So on this I've just got an EQ and I've got a compressor. I've also got an acoustic simulator, but I'm not going to be using that since I'm actually using an acoustic guitar. So if I put it over onto the live mode and then highlight the compressor, I'll be able to toggle that on and off. Well, it's not in tune, so we'll tune it. I really like the way the tuner has the light up, the buttons light up with red and green lights. Makes it really easy to see. And there you go, it works. So you can hear the difference there between the compression and not compression. I've only run into an issue with this once on a gig where I accidentally pressed that foot switch and then I had to take a moment to scroll back over to my compressor. But it doesn't take too long, and just be careful and it won't happen to you. Yeah, so now I'll plug in my bass. So this acoustic guitar preset actually sounds pretty dang good for bass. Let's see how the master EQ affects the sound. So the only thing I don't like about this is the compressors don't have a fast enough attack. I can't seem to get a good compression sound that I like without it having that huge pop, like if I'm doing a little popping. You have to be kind of used to what compressors sound like, but it's letting too much volume through before it engages the compression. And it's spiking really loud, but I think for most people, for most genres, that's not really an issue. So let's see, I made a bass preset I was really liking. I think it's this one. Yeah. So on this preset, it's just very simple, compressor, EQ, and then this is an overdrive. I basically only put the overdrive on there so that it would catch those loud volume spikes that the compressor lets through. And it works pretty well, plus it gives it a little bit of grit. I like it. So, I play bass and guitar, and yet I don't own the bass version of this pedal. I actually did buy both, thinking that I might need both, but I didn't find any must-have effects in the bass version that didn't also exist in the guitar version. The only advantage the bass version has over the guitar version is that it has more of like a synth bass kind of vibe to it. It has more auto filters and harmonic exciters and stuff. Bass version also has fewer overdrives and more compressors, but even going through all those compressors, I didn't find any that I really liked. The best one I found, the one that I was most comfortable working with, was the one that's just called Comp, and I think that's supposed to be like an MXR Dynacomp. And that exists in this guitar version as well as in the bass version. Some of the effects in the bass version had a blend control. Like, for example, the Tube Screamer overdrive in the bass version has a blend control, so you could blend in some of your dry signal as much as you want. And I suppose that's useful. I find that if I just use a lighter touch like this, you know, I use my fingers to get my dynamics and to get my change in my tone. The bass version also doesn't have any of the guitar amp simulations. Instead, it has bass amp simulations. I personally can't figure out why I would want to simulate a bass amp. And what I mean is, the way they sound, they're so overblown, like the low end in them is so ridiculously bloated that if you tried to run it through a PA system, it would just be all lows. It would not sound good at all. I already find, even with just the guitar amps, that sometimes I have to tame the low end a little bit coming through the PA. I tried all of the bass amp sims in the bass version and just didn't find any of them useful. I ended up just bypassing them and trying to just use the effects because that sounded a lot better. Like on this patch, on this guitar version, I'm not using an amp simulation at all. It's just the bass sound with a little EQ, compression, and a little overdrive. And that's what sounds good to me. But yeah, if you're a multi-instrumentalist, if you play guitar and you also play bass, I would recommend getting the guitar version. I don't think the bass version is worth it. But if you really need those envelope filters and synthy kind of sounds, then the bass version is the only one that has those as far as I know. There's also a new version that's aimed at acoustic instruments that comes with a microphone converter, so you can plug an XLR mic into it and it'll convert it down to a 1/4 inch. And I took a look at the effects list for that, and it has a lot of the effects from the bass and the guitar version, plus a whole bunch more stuff. So I'm not sure, they might have upgraded it, and they might have upgraded the capacity for the effects. It seems to have a lot more effects available, but I think that one only had like a twin reverb amp or something. Like as far as electric guitar amps, I think there was only one, whereas this one has a whole bunch, and there's a whole bunch of like high gain metal stuff in here if you're into that. I don't really do much of that these days, but it's good to have it there when I need it. Anyway, you can see I've been playing with this thing for about an hour. It's been plugged in a little over an hour, and my battery is still showing four lights, so that means it's pretty near full capacity still. So if you got one of these portable batteries, you can pretty much run this thing for days. Like, it doesn't eat that much power. Yeah, I guess I'm done talking about it now. What more is there to say, really? I guess I'll loop something real quick. Well, thank God you can turn down the volume of the loops. I guess the other thing to point out would be you can go out of the looper while it keeps playing, and you can switch to another patch. Let's go to this one. Go back to the looper. So you might have noticed that the looper finished its loop before it finished. That's because you got stop mode here. Either instant, fade out, or finish. I guess instant's probably the most useful in the real world. Alright, that's it.